Hello, thank you for joining this biology session. We'll be going over chapter 29 in the biology book, which is about animal behavior. You're going to see some practice questions on the screen. There's nothing for you to do. You can't click on them or submit them in any way. Just follow along and use them to help yourself check your understanding. So 29.1 is called elements of behavior. A behavior is the way an organism reacts to a stimulus. So we learned in a previous chapter that a stimulus could be anything that an organism encounters in the environment. So it could be something as simple as a sight or a smell or a sound or a feeling, or it could be something like the presence of another animal, something like that. So anything that's in their environment that's going to affect them. So the way that they react to it is called a behavior. And behaviors can also be complex or very simple. So it could be something like moving towards food or moving away from danger. It could be a more complicated behavior like building a nest or migrating 1,000 miles every year. Innate behaviors are what we generally call instincts. Innate behaviors are ones that animals are born able to do without learning through experience. And then learned behaviors are ones that animals need to learn. They need to have experience that teaches them how to do that. And we're going to study learned behaviors further. So different types of learned behaviors. One is habituation. Habituation is a type of learning where the animal stops responding to a stimuli once he realizes that that stimulus doesn't matter. So the example given in your book is birds near a road. Initially, cars driving down the road may scare them away, but they eventually learn the car is not harming them if they're not in its path. They're willing to remain close when that car is passed. Is a similar example. This is from Assateague Island. This little foal was afraid of the cars. So when the cars started moving, she ran right over to her mom. But the older adult horses and these are feral horses that just wander around the island, they couldn't care less that the cars were there. They stood in the road as the cars drove by them. So this is habituation. They had quickly learned cars don't matter. They're not going to do anything to us. We can just stand here and they'll go around us. Classical conditioning is when an animal associates a stimulus with a positive or negative experience. For example, famous Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov rang a bell before feeding his dogs, and the dogs learned to associate the sound of the bell with getting food. So they would start to drool anytime that they heard a bell. Another example would be if a puppy is scared or hurt by a man in a hat. For the rest of its life, it may run away or growl anytime it sees a man in a hat. Operant conditioning is essentially training. Operant conditioning is when an animal learns to behave in a certain way in order to get a reward or avoid a punishment. So this could be something where the reward or punishment is given by another animal or by a human, or just by the environment. They're learning that something they do is good or bad. An example would be if a puppy likes to play with people but bites, but playtime stops every time she bites your hand, she will learn not to bite so that she can continue to be rewarded with play. Operant conditioning is based on trial and error. The animal generally does the initial behavior, not expecting a reward or punishment, but quickly learns to associate them. Many people confuse classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So to remember the difference, remember that operant conditioning is focused on a behavior. The animal's action results in a punishment or reward. Classical conditioning focuses instead on a stimulus. The animal just learns to associate that stimulus with a punishment or a reward. And the last type is insight learning. This is when an animal applies something that is already learned to a new situation. There's no trial and error. The animal just uses reasoning to figure out what will happen or what will work in that situation. For example, you may teach a dog that it can get on a chair in order to be up higher and closer to you. And the dog can use insight learning to realize it can also get on a chair to reach food that's on the high counter. So that's all there is in section one. We're going to go over a couple of review questions here. So which of these require learning? And there's more than one correct answer. So think about which ones are correct and which ones are not. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, habituation, and innate behaviors. I'll give you a few seconds to think about which ones do and don't require learning. So our answers are actually um, classical conditioning and operant conditioning and habituation. So remember, classical conditioning is the animal learning that a certain stimulus will have a certain effect. Operant conditioning is the animal learning that if they behave in a certain way, they get a certain effect. Habituation is an animal learning that a certain stimulus doesn't matter. And then the last one, innate behaviors, there's no learning there at all. Those are instincts. They're things that don't require learning. And one more quick review, match the example to the type of learning. So our examples on the left, they're all involving a lab rat. The rat presses a button and gets food. So it keeps pressing the button in order to get more food. So is that classical operant or habituation? Our second one, a lab rat is scared of loud noises at first, but it gets used to them and stops caring. And our third one, a lab rat sees a green light and then gets food. So it associates the green light with food. And anytime it sees a green light, it expects to get food later. So our first one, the lab rat presses a button. That's a behavior that the rat has to do in order to get the reward. So that's operant conditioning. Our middle one, the lab rat is scared at first and then gets used to it. That's habituation. And our third one, the rat sees a green light and gets food. So it's encountering a stimulus and associates the reward with that stimulus. That's classical conditioning. And both operant and classical conditioning can have positive and negative results. So both of these are about the rat getting food, but you could do the same thing and say the rat gets punished. It could press the button and get a electrical shock and learn that the button is bad, or it could see a green light and get an electrical shock and learn that green lights are bad. So they could go both ways, but I just used positive examples for this one. The second section is behavioral cycles. So animal behavior can change in daily cycles going along with daily changes in light and temperature. These changes are called circadian rhythm, and they combine both physiological changes and behavior changes. So examples would be some animals sleep during the night and are active during the day. Other animals sleep during the day and are active at night. Still, other animals sleep during the darkest part of the night and the hot afternoon, and they're active during the morning and evening. All three of those are examples of daily circadian rhythms. There's a period where it's resting, a period where it's active, and it keeps going, day after day. Seasonal cycles are behaviors that change as the seasons do. So, in parts of the world with winter, many animals are active in the spring and summer, store up food reserves in the summer and fall, and become less active in winter. Migrations are also a seasonal cycle. Many species migrate seasonally to take advantage of better feeding grounds at different times of year, raise their young in a special location, or avoid frozen weather. So we're probably familiar with geese migrating, flying in a V. They go south for the winter and then north in the summer. But there's a lot of mammals that migrate too. Big herds of animals like these caribou, they'll migrate from place to place. Social behaviors describe how animals interact with others in their species. Social behaviors include aggression to defend their territories, def- defend their families, or dominate a rival for mates. Courtship rituals are the ways that individuals attract others for mating, and these vary greatly between species. And Animals that live in groups have interactions that help them bond with each other, such as these wolves playfully chewing on each other's faces. Some animals live alone for most of their lives, rarely coming together, but others live in societies. So, societies are groups that live and work together. And this can be very beneficial. Living in societies can help the animals acquire food, defend from predators, create shelters, and successfully raise offspring. So, examples of animals that live in societies are prairie dogs, which live in a burrow that they all dig for each other, and then they keep lookouts. So while some of them are eating or sleeping, others are watching for prey and then are predators, and they let everyone else know if there's a problem. Lions that live in a family group called a pride, where all of the females work together to hunt and the males help protect the pride. And bees, where they build the hive together, and then all of the workers collect food for the whole hive and help to raise the young, and they're all organized under one queen. Animals communicate with visual signals via body language, um, such as in dogs, you can clearly tell the dog on the left wants to play, and the dog on the right is telling you, no, you stay away from me. They can communicate with audible signals by making various sounds, and chemical signals, both by smell and by releasing pheromones, which are chemicals that are used to signal different things. So this dog here is leaving his chemical signal on the fire hydrant. But whether animals have a language is kind of a difficult question. Language is a complex system of communication that uses rules to combine sounds, symbols, and movements into something meaningful. So, by that definition, other animals do not have a language on par with that of humans because there's no complex system of rules for their communications. However, animals can clearly get messages to one another from distinct visual and audible and chemical cues. Some more review questions before we go. How long is one cycle in a circadian rhythm? Does it last 4 hours, 1 day, 1 season, or 1 year? And circadian rhythm is 1 day. So active at night, sleeping during the day, active at night, sleeping during the day. It just keeps repeating 1 day at a time. And which of the following is not a social behavior? Courtship, aggressive, bonding activities, or circadian rhythm? Okay, so those first three are definitely social behaviors between animals. The only one that's not is circadian rhythm. That's more of what's happening within an individual animal's behavior. So that brings us to the end of this chapter, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact an instructor.